David meditated before he killed Goliath, not prayed. If you have ever begged for a breakthrough that never came, and wondered if you were doing faith wrong, this one is for you. There is an old verse from the Psalms, traditionally David's own words about his own life, that says, "But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night." And that single line undoes almost everything most people think they know about getting God to move, because notice what it does not say. It does not say he begged day and night. It does not say he pleaded day and night. It says he meditated day and night. And this is the same David who later stood in a valley in front of a giant 9 feet tall and did not fall to his knees and cry out for help. He opened his mouth and declared what was already settled inside him. And Kenyon would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? The boy did not run to the tent to ask the Lord for a miracle in that moment. He had already meditated the miracle into his spirit long before the giant ever opened his mouth." And that is the exact step that sense-knowledge prayer teaches us to skip. We run straight to asking, and we never do the quiet work that makes the asking unnecessary. Say it with me. I meditate on the word before I ever speak. I let it grow bigger in me than the giant I face. I am what the word says. Again, I meditate on the word before I ever speak. I let it grow bigger in me than the giant I face. I am what the word says. Before we go any further, subscribe now, so that tomorrow's teaching finds you the same way this one did. If something in you just went quiet while you heard that, you already know what to do. Type the words, "I'm ready," in the comments, and let that be your seal before we begin. The first law is, meditation is not asking, it is feeding. Until fear has nowhere left to stand, picture a man in a waiting room, the kind with the stiff chairs and the old magazines, and he is praying under his breath, "Please, please, please," over and over, and his hands are shaking, and his knees are bouncing, and every few minutes he checks the door like the answer is going to walk through it. That is sense-knowledge prayer. It is real. It is sincere. But it is begging a fact to change while staring straight at the fact. Kenyon taught that this kind of prayer keeps a person chained to what they can see and feel, because you cannot beg your way past what your senses insist is true. Now picture a different man in that same chair. He is not shaking. He is not checking the door. He has a verse turning over quietly in his mind. He has said it so many times in private that it has stopped feeling like a request and started feeling like a fact he already owns. That is meditation. It is not louder prayer. It is deeper feeding, and by the time his name gets called, he is not hoping. He is simply not afraid anymore. Notice something else about these two men. They are sitting in the exact same room, facing the exact same news. One of them is exhausting himself trying to talk God into something. The other has already been fed so long that there is nothing left in him for fear to grip onto. That is the whole difference between asking and feeding. Asking treats the fear as the main event and tries to shout over it. Feeding simply starves the fear quietly, day after day, until the day it finally shows up loud. It discovers there is nothing left inside you willing to answer it. Think of a student the night before an exam. One kind of student stays up frantically pleading for a good grade, cramming and panicking in the same breath. Another kind of student has been quietly reviewing a little every night for weeks. So the night before, there is nothing left to beg for, only something to rest in. That quiet nightly review is what meditation looks like in ordinary life. It is available to you this week, the very first time you catch yourself begging instead of feeding. I do not beg the word, I feed on it until it is mine. The second law is, the word has to outweigh the fact, or the fact will keep winning, every single time. And this is not a small technicality. This is the entire hinge of whether your meditation ever becomes anything more than a nice private feeling. Think about the ordinary Tuesday, where the bank notification hits your phone before you have even had coffee, and the number is lower than you expected, and your stomach drops. That number is a fact. It is real. Nobody is asking you to pretend it is not there. Kenyon taught that facts are not the same thing as truth. Facts describe what your five senses can currently measure. Truth is what God has already said is so, and the two do not always match. Not yet. And most people spend their whole lives trying to argue the fact into silence, instead of simply outweighing it. They stare at the number. They refresh the app 3 more times. They tell themselves not to worry, while worry is the only thing left standing in the room. That is a fact, with no counterweight, and a fact with no counterweight always wins the argument. David looked at Goliath and saw the fact plainly. 9 feet of muscle and bronze and rage. He never denied what his eyes were showing him. He was not practicing denial. Denial is its own kind of lie. But he had spent years building something inside himself that weighed more than that fact. So when the moment came, the fact did not get the final vote. The meditated word did. Picture it like an actual scale sitting in a kitchen. On one side, you keep stacking the bills, the diagnosis, the notice in the mail, the unanswered message, and that side gets heavier every single day, just from ordinary living. Nobody has to add weight to that side on purpose. Life does it for you. So if you never deliberately load the other side, the scale is never even close. It tips instantly, every time. And here is where most people quietly get stuck. They wait for the fact to change before they will let the word feel true. They say, once the number looks better, I will feel peaceful. Once the results come back clean, I will believe the promise. But that is asking the lighter side of the scale to somehow win without ever being loaded. It works the other way. You let the word grow heavier first, in private, on the ordinary days, long before any giant shows up, quietly, unglamorously, a verse turned over during a commute, a promise repeated under your breath while the coffee brews. None of it looks dramatic while it is happening, but weight is being added on that side of the scale every single time you do it, so that when the fact does show up loud and enormous, demanding the whole room's attention, it finds a scale already tipped against it. And this week, when a number or a diagnosis or a phone call tries to be the loudest thing in the room, do not silence it and do not deny it. Just ask yourself quietly, what have I been loading onto the other side? And if the honest answer is nothing yet, let that be the moment you start. One verse, turned over slowly, is a small weight, but small weights added daily are exactly how David's side of the scale got heavier than a giant's. The fact may be loud, but the word outlasts it. The third law is, confession always comes after meditation, never before it. And getting that order backward is why so many declarations feel hollow. People say the right words, I am healed, I am provided for, I am more than enough, and nothing shifts, and they conclude the words do not work. But Kenyon taught that words carry the weight of whatever has been built behind them, and if nothing has been built, the words are just noise wearing the costume of faith. Think about a man rehearsing for a hard conversation. He stands in his kitchen the night before and says the sentence out loud, I am not afraid to ask for what I am owed, and it comes out thin and shaky, and he does not believe it, even as he says it, because he only picked the sentence up an hour ago. He is trying to confess something he has never actually meditated on, so the words have nothing underneath them to stand on. Now picture a different version of that same man, someone who has spent weeks quietly turning that same truth over, on the drive, in the shower, in the 5 minutes before sleep, not saying it loudly, just letting it settle, chewing on it the way you chew on something slowly instead of swallowing it whole, By the time he finally speaks that sentence out loud in the actual conversation, it does not come out thin anymore. It comes out steady, because it is no longer a hope he is performing. It is simply a fact he is reporting. That is the entire difference between confession that was born too early and confession that was born on time. Look again at David. Before he ever said a single sentence to Goliath, he had spent long, unseen seasons alone with sheep, alone with a lion, alone with a bear, alone with his own thoughts, turning over what he believed about the God who had kept him every single time. None of that happened in front of an audience. None of it was recorded. None of it looked impressive. It looked like a bored boy talking to himself in a field. But that field is exactly where the declaration in the valley was actually written. So when he finally opened his mouth in front of the giant, he was not manufacturing courage on the spot. He was simply repeating out loud what had already become fact in private. And this is worth sitting with honestly. Because most people try to reverse the order. They speak first, hoping the meditation will catch up later, and it rarely does. The words end up chasing a belief that was never actually built. This week, before you try to speak boldly over a situation that scares you, ask yourself honestly, have I meditated on this long enough that the words will have something real to stand on? Or am I about to say something brave with nothing built underneath it? Let the field come first, and let the valley simply be where you say out loud what the field already settled. I do not speak until the word has already settled the matter in me. The fourth law is, there is a hidden man inside you, and he grows strong only on what you feed him. This is one of the deepest things Kenyon ever taught, and it is easy to rush past because it sounds abstract until you feel its weight. He taught that when a person becomes a new creation, something happens that is not visible to the eye. The human spirit is recreated, made brand new, and this recreated spirit, he called it the hidden man of the heart, is not the same thing as your feelings, and it is not the same thing as your body. Your feelings can be exhausted, your body can be trembling, your voice can crack, and underneath all three of those, this hidden man can be standing perfectly calm. It is not emotion, it is a separate reality, quietly present, whether you notice it or not, and Kenyon was careful to draw that line clearly, because most people confuse feeling strong with being strong. They wait to feel brave before they call themselves brave, but the hidden man does not run on feeling. He runs on what has actually been deposited into him over time. So two people can face the exact same bad news. One collapses and one stands steady. And it is not because one of them felt something the other did not. It is because one of them had been quietly building something the other had not. Here is the part people miss most often. This hidden man does not grow strong automatically just because he exists. Kenyon taught that he grows exactly the way a body grows, through feeding, through repetition, through what you consistently put into him. A newborn does not simply arrive strong, it is fed daily, for years, until strength shows up almost without anyone noticing it happening. Nobody stands over a crib waiting for a baby to become strong overnight. Everyone understands that strength there is slow, patient, built one small feeding at a time, and yet the same people who understand that perfectly well with an infant expect the hidden man inside them to be strong instantly, with no feeding at all, simply because they prayed once, or read a verse once, or felt something briefly in a service. The hidden man works the same way as the newborn, and most people spend their whole lives feeding their eyes and their ears with everything except the one thing that actually strengthens him. Think about an ordinary day. You wake up and the first thing you feed yourself is the news, then a scroll through messages before your feet even hit the floor, then worry about a meeting on the drive-in, then more scrolling on a break, then a tense phone call at lunch, then the evening news again while dinner is cooking, then one more scroll before your eyes finally close. By nightfall, you have fed your senses a dozen times, maybe more, and you have fed the hidden man not even once. And then you wonder why. In the moment, a real Goliath shows up, a hard diagnosis, a job loss, a phone call you were not ready for. You feel weak on the inside, small, outmatched. It is not a mystery, and it is not a punishment. It is math, plain and simple. Whatever you feed the most is what shows up the strongest. When pressure hits, you cannot starve something all week and expect it to carry you on the one day you need it most. And notice something else about that ordinary day. None of that feeding felt dramatic in the moment. Nobody sat down and decided on purpose to starve their hidden man. It simply happened by default, by drift, by reaching for the phone before reaching for anything else. That is the quiet danger in it. Starvation rarely looks like a decision. It looks like a habit nobody examined. Now imagine a different, ordinary day. The same schedule, the same demands, the same meeting, the same dinner to cook, but somewhere in the cracks of it, on the drive, in the shower, in the 5 minutes before sleep, a verse is turning over, being chewed on slowly, being pictured rather than just glanced at, being let in rather than just read past. That is not a small habit. That is construction work happening on the one part of you that Goliath cannot actually touch. It is not louder effort. It is quieter deposit. Think of it the way a person training for something difficult trains long before the event ever arrives. Nobody sees the early mornings. Nobody applauds the repetition. But on the day it matters, that unseen work is the only reason the body performs the way it does. The hidden man is trained the exact same way. In private, unnoticed, on days that feel completely uneventful. Think also of a gardener tending soil months before anything is planted, turning it, feeding it, watering ground that shows nothing yet on the surface. Anyone glancing at that plot would see only dirt, no proof, no visible reward. And yet that invisible work underground is the entire reason something eventually grows tall enough to survive a storm. The hidden man is that soil, fed quietly long before any storm ever forms on the horizon. First, consider that this hidden man is already recreated in you if you belong to Christ. He is not something you have to manufacture from nothing, and he is not something you have to earn through effort or performance. He is already there, complete, waiting. Second, consider that feeding him does not require long hours or dramatic devotion. It requires consistency. A little truth chewed on slowly every single day does more over time than an hour of frantic Bible reading once a month out of guilt. It is not intensity that builds him, it is rhythm. Third, consider that starving him does not require any dramatic decision either. It happens by default. The moment you let every spare minute belong automatically to noise instead of to anything that feeds this deeper part of you. Fourth, consider that this is exactly what David was doing in that field for years before anyone was watching. He was not preparing a speech for Goliath. He had no idea Goliath was even coming. He was simply feeding the hidden man, because that had become his ordinary rhythm with the sheep, with the silence, with his own private thoughts, turning over what he already knew about the God who had kept him. And when the day of pressure finally arrived, he was not starting from zero. He was only spending what had already been quietly deposited over years nobody else witnessed. Pause for a moment and pick one real pocket of your ordinary day. The drive, the dishes, the walk to the mailbox, the few minutes before the lights go out, and feed the hidden man there on purpose. One verse, chewed slowly, spoken quietly under your breath. Nothing dramatic, nothing that needs an audience. Let that be the whole assignment. Do it again tomorrow in that same small pocket of time, and do it again the day after that, and watch, patiently, without demanding proof on day one. What slowly begins to stand up in you when pressure finally does come knocking on your door. The hidden man in me grows strong on what I feed him, and I feed him daily. Before we go on, take a breath with me. If this teaching is doing something in you, subscribe now, so the next one finds you at exactly the moment you need it. The fifth law is, you do not fight a spirit-sized battle with sense-sized weapons, and it is worth slowing down on this one, even though it will not take long to say. Saul offered David his own armor before the fight, heavy, polished, proven in real battles, the kind of armor a whole army would have trusted, and David put it on, and took a few steps and felt how wrong it sat on him, too big in some places, too stiff in others, made for a different kind of man, fighting a different kind of war. So he took it off, and picked up the sling he already knew how to use. And Kenyon taught that people do almost the exact opposite of this under pressure. Instead of setting down what does not fit, they strap it on tighter. Think of a man the night before a hard conversation with his boss. He cannot sleep, so he rehearses arguments in his head until 3 in the morning. He imagines every way it could go wrong. He tightens his shoulders and clenches his jaw and calls all of that being prepared. But it is not preparation. It is borrowed armor. Worry was never built to win this fight. Dread was never built to win this fight. Replaying the worst outcome 50 times was never built to win this fight. It is heavy, it is exhausting, and it does not fit the kind of battle a believer is actually in. Notice what David did not do. He did not fight fear with more fear dressed up as caution. He simply set the borrowed thing down and walked toward the field with what was actually his, small, plain, unimpressive to anyone watching, and entirely sufficient. This week, when pressure shows up and your hands instinctively reach for the old armor, the pacing, the spiraling, the frantic rehearsal of disaster, notice the weight of it before you put it on. And remember, you are always allowed to set it back down. I lay down borrowed weapons, and I pick up only what was made for me. The sixth law is, meditation turns knowledge into image, and image into boldness, and boldness into action, and skipping any one of those steps is why people stall out. Kenyon taught that simply knowing a Bible fact is not the same as it becoming real to you. Knowledge sits in the head, cold and filed away, but meditation moves it, slowly, from head to heart, until it stops being information and starts being an image you can actually see. And once you can see it, something shifts. You stop needing to work up courage, because the courage was never the missing piece. The missing image was. Most people treat this like a small technicality, a nice extra step for the especially spiritual. But Kenyon treated it as the whole engine. Without the image, the word just sits there like a seed left in its packet, never opened, never planted, never watered. It may be a perfectly good seed, full of everything it needs, but a packet on a shelf has never once grown into a tree. Meditation is the planting, the watering, the daily returning to the same patch of ground until something breaks the surface. Think of a mother sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of bills she cannot yet cover. If she only has knowledge, a verse she memorized once in a class years ago, that knowledge sits there flat and useless while her stomach turns. She can recite it perfectly and still feel exactly as afraid as before she recited it. That is the trap. Words repeated without an image behind them do not move anything. But if she has meditated, turned that same verse over daily, pictured the check arriving, pictured her hand steady instead of shaking, pictured the relief on her own face before it has happened, something different starts happening in her body. Her shoulders drop, her breathing slows, and by the time she actually has to make the call or write the check, she is not performing bravery she does not feel. The image already made the outcome feel settled long before the action was required of her. Now follow that same seed a little further, because a seed does not become a tree the moment it is watered once. It happens in stages. First, the knowledge goes in, like the bare seed dropped into soil, unremarkable, easy to miss. Then meditation waters it, quietly, day after day, until a shoot of image pushes up through the ground. You can finally picture the thing you once only quoted. Then that image, tended a little longer, grows a trunk of boldness, sturdy enough to hold weight. And only after the trunk is strong does it bear the fruit of action, real, visible, in the world. And here is the part almost everyone rushes past. You cannot rush a seed by shouting at the dirt. You cannot skip straight from the packet to the fruit. And yet that is exactly what most people try to do with their faith. They read a verse once, feel a small spark, and immediately try to act boldly on it. And when the boldness is not there yet, they conclude the verse must not be true for them, when really the seed was simply never watered long enough to grow a trunk that could carry weight. This is the exact mechanism David used in that valley. He did not manufacture courage out of nothing while staring up at 9 feet of bronze and rage. He had spent years alone with sheep, alone under open sky, turning God's past faithfulness over and over until it stopped being a memory and became a moving picture he could see clearly with his eyes closed. The lion, the bear, the quiet rescues nobody else witnessed, meditated on so many times that they fused into one continuous image of a God who finishes what he starts. So walking toward Goliath was never a leap into the unknown for him. It simply felt like the next natural frame in a film he had already watched play out to the end many times in his own mind. The giant was new. The ending was not. Notice, too, that nobody handed David that image. No one else could water that seed for him. His father was not out in the field with him rehearsing the lion and the bear. His brothers were not sitting beside him picturing the outcome. It was solitary, unglamorous work. And it is exactly that kind of work, done alone, on ordinary days, that quietly grows the trunk strong enough to hold a nation's fear on the day it finally matters. Pause for a moment and pick one real situation in your life right now, something specific, not vague, not a general wish for things to improve. Name it plainly to yourself, and then ask honestly, do I only know a truth about this? Have I quoted a verse at it a few times and called that finished? Or have I actually meditated long enough that I can picture the outcome as clearly as I can picture the problem? Most people, if they are honest, will find they are still standing at the level of bare knowledge, reciting words at a fear they have never actually outpictured. And that is not a failure. That is simply the next step revealing itself. If the answer is only knowledge, that is your assignment this week, not to say the verse more times, but to sit with it daily, slowly, until it stops being a sentence and becomes a scene you can walk into. Water the same patch of ground tomorrow that you watered today, and again the day after. And do not dig the seed up early just to check if it is growing. Let it stay buried long enough to actually become a tree. I do not stop at knowing it. I meditate until I can see it. The 7th law is, and this is the deepest one, so let it unfold slowly. There is a difference between petition and possession, and almost everyone lives their whole spiritual life on the wrong side of that line without realizing it. First, consider what petition actually is. Petition is asking for something you are not yet sure you have. It treats God like a distant source you have to convince. It is the posture of the outer courts, hoping the door opens, and there is nothing shameful about starting there. But Kenyon taught that the finished work of the cross was never meant to leave a believer permanently in that posture. He taught that certain things were legally settled the moment Christ finished his work, not things you are still trying to obtain, things you already legally own and simply have not yet taken possession of in your own experience. That gap between legal ownership and lived possession is exactly where meditation does its work. It is the bridge between what is already true on paper and what finally becomes true in your hands. Second, Picture a man who receives a letter telling him an uncle he barely knew has left him a modest house across town, fully paid, deed and all. The letter is real, the deed is filed, the house is legally his, the moment the letter arrives, and yet he keeps paying rent on a cramped apartment for months. He keeps complaining about the leaking faucet and the noisy neighbors, because he has not gone to walk through his own rooms. He has not turned the key in his own door. He has not stood in his own kitchen long enough for it to feel like his. Technically, he possesses it. In his actual daily life, he is still living like a renter, and this is precisely the picture Kenyon used again and again to describe most believers. They hold a deed, signed and sealed at the cross, and they are still paying the rent of fear and lack and begging, because they have never walked the rooms long enough for the deed to become a felt reality. Meditation is the walking through the rooms. It is the only thing that turns a legal fact into a lived home. Third, follow that same man a little further, because the story does not end with the letter arriving. Imagine he finally drives across town one Saturday, just to look. He unlocks the door with a key that has been sitting in a drawer for weeks, and he steps into rooms that are technically already his and still feel like someone else's. The light falls a certain way across the kitchen floor, and he notices it the way a guest notices things. Not the way an owner does. He sits on the stairs for a while, uncertain, and this is the exact moment most people quit. They walk in once, feel like a stranger, and decide the house must not really be theirs after all. So they go back to the apartment and the leaking faucet and the rent they already know how to pay. But suppose instead he comes back the next Saturday, and the one after that, sitting in the same kitchen, standing at the same window, until slowly the light falling across that floor stops feeling like someone else's light and starts feeling like his own. That repeated, returning, unremarkable, almost boring to describe, is the entire mechanism of meditation. It is not one dramatic walkthrough that changes everything. It is the sitting and returning and sitting again until a legal fact quietly becomes a felt home. Fourth, consider that this is precisely why David did not pray a petition in that valley. He was not asking God for a chance at victory he was unsure of. He had already, in private, settled the matter so completely that by the time he spoke to Goliath, he spoke from possession, not from petition. Listen again to the posture behind his words. He was not saying, "Please let me win this." He was saying, "This is already decided, and the giant simply has not found that out yet." That is not arrogance. That is the natural way a person talks, once meditation has moved something from legal fact into lived reality, and this is available to you the same way, not through pretending you feel certain when you do not, but through the same patient inward work, sitting with a truth, turning it over, letting it move from something you technically know is yours into something you can feel is yours. Fifth, notice how differently this plays out in an ordinary week. On Monday you read a promise, and it is still just words on a page. That is knowledge. On Tuesday you turn it over again, chewing on it during a commute. That is the beginning of meditation. By Wednesday, you catch yourself picturing what it would actually look like for that promise to be lived out. That is the image forming. By Thursday, without trying to force anything, you notice you are less anxious about the very thing the promise addresses. That is possession beginning to settle in. And by the time some kind of pressure actually arrives on Friday, you are not starting the work from zero, you are simply standing on what the week already built. This is not a formula that guarantees a certain number of days, but it is the pattern: knowledge, then meditation, then image, then possession, then action. And every single stage requires the one before it. You cannot skip from bare knowledge straight to bold action and expect the boldness to hold under real pressure. It will crack, because nothing was actually built underneath it. Sixth, think of a young woman who is told her scholarship has already been fully approved. The letter says so plainly. The funds are already set aside in her name, and yet every week she still opens the portal on her phone and refreshes it nervously, checking again, half convinced it might have vanished overnight. She is not lying about her fear. The fear is real to her, but notice what she is actually doing. She already holds the letter, and she is still living like an applicant, still petitioning a decision that has already been made. If instead she took that same letter and read it slowly each morning, let herself picture the semester actually paid, let the relief settle in her chest before the first payment was even due, she would stop refreshing the portal out of panic and start checking it, if at all, out of simple curiosity. That shift, from anxious checking to quiet curiosity, is what meditation produces. It does not change what the letter says. The letter never changes. It changes how she carries what the letter already says. Seventh, notice too the difference between confession without meditation and confession after meditation. If the man with the house tries to skip straight to acting like an owner, bragging to a neighbor about a house he has never once visited, that is not possession, that is pretending, and pretending collapses the first time someone asks him a real question about his own house. What color are the walls? How does the second stair creak? But if he actually drives across town, actually opens the door, actually sits in the empty rooms until they stop feeling foreign, then when someone finally challenges his ownership, he does not flinch. Because he has been there. He knows it. Confession without meditation is a costume. Confession after meditation is simply a report from a place you have already stood in. Eighth, consider one more layer to this. Kenyon often pointed out that sense knowledge, what your eyes and ears and body report to you, will always argue loudly against what the Word says, and it will keep arguing. It does not go quiet. Just because you believe something, the giant does not stop being 9 feet tall. Just because David has meditated, the letter does not stop feeling foreign the first time you read it. The portal still exists and can still be refreshed out of habit. What changes is not the fact. What changes is which voice gets the final say inside you. Revelation knowledge does not erase sense knowledge. It simply outranks it, and that outranking only happens through meditation, never through information alone, and never through panic dressed up as prayer. So here is the full shape of this law, laid out plainly. Petition keeps you outside the door asking permission. Possession is standing inside the room you were already given. Meditation is the only road between those two places, and it is a road you walk slowly, quietly, on ordinary days, long before any valley opens up in front of you. The man with the deed did not become an owner the day the letter arrived. He became an owner the day the rooms stopped feeling foreign, and David did not discover this road in the valley. He had been walking it for years already. The valley only revealed how far down that road he had already come. I do not ask permission for what is already mine. I walk in it. The eighth law is, meditation is a daily rhythm, not an emergency measure. And this is exactly where good intentions quietly fall apart. Look again at the wording from the Psalms. He meditated day and night, not the day the trouble arrived, not the week the pressure spiked. Day and night, as a steady, unremarkable rhythm that never asked permission from circumstances. Most people only remember to meditate on the Word when a Goliath is already standing in front of them, and by then they are trying to build years of feeding into a single desperate afternoon. And Kenyon taught that this never works, because meditation is not a fire extinguisher you grab once smoke appears. It is more like wiring already built into the walls, long before any fire ever starts. Think about a man who only calls his brother when he needs money. There is a relationship there, technically, but it has no depth, no history, nothing banked between the emergencies, and when a real crisis finally comes, that thin, occasional contact cannot carry the weight of what is being asked of it. Now think about a woman who calls her sister every single evening, just to talk about nothing important, the weather, the kids, a small funny thing that happened at work. No crisis, no agenda, just rhythm. And when something truly hard finally happens in her life, that sister already knows her voice, already knows exactly how to hold her, because the closeness was built on 1,000 ordinary evenings, not on one desperate call. That is the exact difference between emergency prayer and daily meditation. One is a stranger showing up asking for help. The other is a lifetime of quiet familiarity that simply gets spoken out loud the moment pressure arrives. Picture the coffee cup in your own kitchen tomorrow morning, the light coming soft through the window before anyone else in the house is even awake. That is not a dramatic moment. Nothing is on fire, no giant is in the room, and that is exactly why it matters, because the word planted there, in that plain, unremarkable stillness, is what quietly becomes strength on a day you cannot yet see coming. Picture also the difference between someone who only trains the week before a big event and someone who has kept a quiet rhythm going for years without anyone watching or applauding. The second person is not more talented. They are not luckier. They simply have more already deposited, and it shows exactly when it is needed most. Notice too that the verse says day and night, meaning this rhythm does not pause on the ordinary days, and it does not pause on the hard nights either. It is the same practice in the sunlight and the same practice in the dark, which is precisely why it can be trusted when the dark actually comes. This week, do not wait for a giant to remind you to meditate. Choose one small, unremarkable moment, the coffee before the day starts, the walk to the car, the last few minutes before sleep, and treat that moment as non-negotiable, not because you are in crisis, not because something is burning, but because that is precisely how the rhythm that will hold you later gets built now, quietly. In the boring hours nobody applauds, David was not a warrior who suddenly discovered faith standing in a valley. He was a shepherd who had been building faith for years in a field nobody was watching, and the valley simply cashed the check that all those ordinary mornings had already written long before Goliath ever opened his mouth. I do not wait for the valley to start meditating. I already have. The 9th law is, every giant in your life is simply waiting for you to meditate longer than you talk about it. And once you understand that, the whole title of this teaching stops being a clever twist and starts being a plain instruction. David meditated before he killed Goliath, not prayed, meaning the asking was never the missing ingredient. The depositing was. And it helps to picture this in an ordinary week instead of a battlefield. Think of a man who finds out on a Monday morning that his job is about to be cut, and his first instinct, the sense-knowledge instinct, is to talk about it constantly. He tells his wife at breakfast. He tells his brother on the phone at lunch. He tells himself at midnight while he stares at the ceiling. And every single time he talks about it, the giant gets a little taller in his mind. Not because talking is wrong, but because talking about a fear before you have meditated on a truth simply feeds the fear the loudest voice in the room. Now picture a different version of that same man. He still knows the news. He still feels the weight of it. But instead of spending his energy talking it into a bigger shape, he spends a few quiet minutes each morning turning over one settled truth that he has been provided for before and he will be provided for again. He does not announce this to everyone. He does not perform confidence he has not built. He simply sits with it, chews on it, lets it grow, and by the time anyone asks him how he is doing, there is something steady underneath his answer that was not there on Monday. That steadiness was not manufactured on the spot. It was meditated into place while no one else was watching. This is exactly the shape of what David was doing for years before Goliath ever opened his mouth. He was not rehearsing speeches for giants. He was simply letting truth outgrow fear in the quiet. And whatever is standing in front of you right now, however tall it looks, however loud its voice sounds across your day, it is not actually waiting for you to argue with it or explain it to everyone you know. It is waiting for you to go quiet long enough and often enough that something inside you becomes bigger than it is. That is not a technique. That is not a clever trick of words. It is simply the same field, the same sheep, the same unremarkable practice David had, available to you in your own ordinary week, on your own ordinary Tuesday, long before your own valley ever opens up. And the giant, whatever shape it takes in your life, a diagnosis, a debt, a decision, a door that has not opened yet, is not measuring how many people you have told. It is only measuring how long you have been quiet with the truth before you ever speak. I meditate longer than I talk, and my giant already knows it. Here is the whole picture. Meditation is not asking, it is feeding. The word must outweigh the fact before it can ever overpower it. Confession only carries weight after meditation has already done its quiet work. The hidden man inside you grows strong only on what you feed him daily. You were never meant to fight this battle with borrowed weapons. Meditation turns knowledge into image, and image into boldness, and boldness into action. Petition keeps you outside the door, while possession is simply walking into the room already given to you. The rhythm has to be daily, not just in the emergency, and every giant is only ever waiting for you to go quiet longer than you talk. None of these were ever 9 separate ideas. They were 9 turns of the same single key, the one David was already turning long before the valley, the one Kenyon spent his whole ministry trying to hand back to ordinary believers. Meditate first, and let the declaration simply be the overflow of what has already been settled. If you are ready to actually live this daily, and not just hear it once and forget it by Friday, that is exactly what the daily practice was built for. It is a simple, guided companion for the kind of quiet, ordinary meditation we walked through today. A few minutes a day, the same field David had. It is available now for $27, fully backed by a 30-day guarantee. If it does not change how you meet your own giants, you simply ask for your money back. No questions. The link is in the description below. Say it with me one last time. I meditate on the word. Before I ever speak, I let it grow bigger in me than the giant I face. I am what the word says. And if that is true of you now, then you already know what David knew standing in that valley. The fight was decided long before it looked decided. Meditate first, and let the rest simply follow.